Uh, Today we go back to the Irish Times because, as I've said before, it's good to cover foreign news and foreign press because you get different varying opinions, and here's one that we have to address as a public and as a nation because we cannot. One of the things that you have to understand about Brexit is that it's built on this imperial nostalgia. A lot of it was again to do with World War Two and the generation that grew up not having actually fought in World War Two, but grew up in the glowing victory of World War Two and told how fantastic Britain was and how its empire was, and yet have grown up not with that, not really understanding what the empire was. Were taught this very ahistorical version of Britain and what it was, not the fact that the empire did massive damage and was basically an exploitative, you know, we have guns, you don't, so we're going to take your land, type of thing, and engaged prolifically in gunboat diplomacy. Um, yeah. Again, we had a massive empire, so what? That doesn't make us special. Lots of countries had empires as well, but we don't treat them differently. But here we go. So, um, again, this comes from the Irish Times, and this comes from Una Munalani. I think that's how you say her name. Hopefully, but I think she's spot on with this because we've said it before about how Britain cannot seem to reconcile its past, and if it can't reconcile its past, how's it going to move forward into the future? So, we need to pay very close attention to what's happening in Britain now. Noise pollution has abated in lockdown, but the piercing alarm bells from America and Britain are ringing louder than ever. As countries look on, we must interrogate how we can prevent falling as far as these two nations. How do we hold on to civility and decency when it has evaporated elsewhere? What kind of environment gave rise to such toxicity as Donald Trump and Boris Johnson, and as they ascended to their country's highest offices? It was too tempting to say it's over, and in many ways it is. Truth, logic, and accountability and normalcy. The latest Dominic Cummings scandal shows again a British political establishment that is obnoxious. Its corruption and lies in hiding in plain sight. This matters, but the sensitive scandals, a subconscious tactic of discombobulation, hide much more embedded problems. The British media have a role to play in decontextualising what is important. When all you have are scandals, nothing becomes scandalous, and the likes of Cummings and Johnson are able to deflect and ignore the concept of culpability. Earlier on in the Trump era, people talked about the red meat being thrown to the White House press corps as they scavenged over the latest gaffe. Across the ocean, British political media orbits scandal like a swarm, subsisting on online hysteria, and meanwhile the hive is left unattended. So God knows what's happening that's actually real, that's generally important. Soon all you have is a succession of crises and of very little information. It's not like having a cast of incredibly ridiculous and incompetent villains makes the Tories less culpable of playing the media. In fact, it makes them more equipped to do so. Remember, the lower they stoop, the lower the public's bar for the behaviour also falls. Just as Trump has framed contemporary American politics as reality television, in Britain, political coverage embodies the great British form of the soap opera. Who's in favour this week? Who's screwed up? Who's having an affair? Who's having a fight? All while knowledge and comprehension of systems and process is lost. There is little context in the episodic churn. Of course, this latest Cummings scandal is newsworthy, but the shock that surrounds it is numbing. How can one be shocked by something Cummings does? He's Dominic Cummings. Boris Johnson is the Prime Minister. What did they expect? Send in the clowns and you wake up the circus. The crucial action for those looking on looking on with horror as both the US and Britain fall apart is to immediately look back at ourselves. The more we know about ourselves, the less likely we are to betray ourselves and each other. A lot is about empathy, but it's also about self-knowledge. The reason America, for example, can't turn itself around is it because it refuses to acknowledge, never mind treat, its central melody. The toxicity at the heart of America is racism. It's a country full of white people who have never confronted the fact that their so-called freedoms and their country's economic power were built on slavery. The cruelty now being meted out to the entire population, although through the course of America is also racist, people of colour will continue to be punished more harshly. And it can be summed up by Angela Davis's famous line: "If they come for me in the morning, they will come for you in the night." Similarly, Britain has never meaningfully confronted its racism with its colonialism, building an empire on the back of invading and pillaging and inflicting misery on whoever shores its brutal mercenaries dressed up as representatives of a made-up crown landed upon. Colonialism is a boomerang. It eventually comes home. If they will come for me in the morning, they will come for you in the night. The most obvious manifestation of colonialism in Britain is the acceptance of the maintenance of class. The class system says that we are kings and you are the peasants, and that will never change. How can a British person be aghast at someone blithely wielding authority without any consequences when they live in a monarchy? And when their own political chambers of power is stacked with lords who assume such positions through birth. Oh, there we go. On Monday, David Laramie tweeted this: "Remember when the UK was respected around the world? Now imagine how we must look today." Laramie is a rare British politician who has consistently stood up against the trolling of society the Tories enjoy so much. But even he cannot escape the British exceptionalism. When was the UK respected around the world beyond the superficial Anglophobia, which is the red flag, primarily an American pursuit? Britain's former glory, which the year zeroists of Brexit were so desperate to restart, is violence. But this is not even in the past. The violence of British colonialism is embedded in the fabric of the world, in the horrors of illegal wars, in the consequences of bleeding nations of their resources, and it couldn't give a toss attitude towards Ireland. And now Britain turns its truncheons on itself. Another phase in the occasionalism of a Tory brutality, which has pummeled everyone from miners to refugees. If one does not confront the basic truths of one's national identity, one will never be able to trace a path forward. Everything becomes a fiction, a narrative designed to block any kind of self-examination. There is lots of talks about gaslighting these days, but the fundamental concept of gaslighting begins far from the corridors of power. The British have been gaslighting each other and themselves for generations. This is the personal propaganda cycle that colonialism instigates. It creates a false hierarchy of superiority rooted in fictions about magical persons and national prowess. Other countries need to pay attention to modern Britain. What has happened is instructive. Accepting plummeting standards in the media, processing a pathological defence to posh bullies, being ignorant of one's history, accepting inequality as some kind of natural law, celebrating buffoons and the blithe and the arrogant exceptionalism is the real downfall, not Dominic Cummings' lies. I have to agree with her. I completely agree with her. Can't say much, but we've talked about this many times before, that British exceptionalism is at the heart and core of many of what's wrong with this country. The idea that, just because you were born rich doesn't necessarily give you the right to rule. You've only got to look at the prime example being, Jacob Rees-Mogg. I mean, look at his sister, and Annunziata Rees-Mogg. But there you go. That's the situation we need to be in, and Britain really needs deep, systematic change. And I think Corbyn was definitely the man to bring that. Can Starmer also be the guy to bring that? Well, he hasn't announced any policies yet or what he intends to do if he's leader, but he's barely got his foot in the door yet. But we'll give him time. I'm prepared to give him time. I'll fully admit, I did a video when Corbyn first came to power. I didn't like the guy. I came to like him because of the policies and what he came to represent. I think that he did have failings. I think that we can't get around that now. But especially momentum. Momentum now, what it needs to do is it needs to start lobbying for ideas and why its ideas should be adopted into the Labour Party. And that hasn't mean that they've gone away. Remember, Starmer has said that going back to the 2017 manifesto, which many of you celebrated, was a perfectly good area to start from. I think, given time, I think Starmer will be a good Prime Minister. But again, we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully I don't have to come back and eat those words. But yeah, I really do hope so. And like I say, sometimes to take a leap forward, it starts with a small step, and sometimes you have to take 2 steps forward and 1 step back to make progress. That's unfortunately sometimes how it is. And sometimes you have to broker deals with people you don't like. And that's one of the things that undermined Corbyn's premiership. The fact that Momentum just threw their weight around in the party and saying, you're going to accept our way or it's not at all. And that's what pissed so many people off. That's what alienated the Blairites and all these other factions. So is there any reason why they got rid of Corbyn? I mean, obviously the other reason is they didn't like his policies, even though, again, why they didn't like them, they just didn't like them because, they weren't, centre enough for them. But I do think that if Momentum is serious about making real change, it will campaign in the party to get these policies forward. And as usual, that involves getting their candidates to be elected and putting those positions forward. I think that is still doable. I still think there can be real change made with Starmer to this country. I fully believe that. You've got to have faith in politics, even in this dark age of clown car politics. You've got to have faith in politics. If you lose faith, then you never want change at all, and you can never affect change because you're never serious about talking about change and how you can actually implement it to be a real serious force for change. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know how we start addressing British exceptionalism and how we start to deconstruct it and how we start to really face the truth of what Britain's past actually was. But there you go. Maybe that all starts when Brexit fails. And as I said before, Brexit is a project that was always built to fail because it never had any policies or concrete ideas. It was just an idea and a fantasy that a select group of people in this country had,